As we leave the wheeling area, we find the terrain begins to change, and there are more beautiful artifacts along the road of another era, and they just happen to be more bridges. You see this beautiful bridge up here? It's the Highway 40 bridge here in Blaine, Ohio, but behind me is the classic brick-covered S bridge, the Blaine Bridge, that was the hallmark of this part of the old National Road. It became the centerpiece of a fabulous celebration of highways and history here in the state of Ohio, and they did a wonderful job preserving it. And it was used as the symbol of Ohio's bicentennial celebration. It's a preserved S bridge, and Ohio is a museum of S bridges. And this piece of infrastructure is yet another bridge. It's a bridge over Peters Creek, and here it is on the old National Road. It's an S bridge. Now let me explain this. Arch bridges couldn't span very much. If you came to a river or creek diagonally, why not cross it this way? And that's what these old S bridges do. Preserved for posterity, re-bricked. Just think of all the traffic that went across here when this was still US 40. But you have to know where to look to find the old artifacts. For example, a brick section of US 40. And if you get off of it, well, you find a treasure. And just outside of Norwich, Ohio, is the Brick Street, the Brick Road, as it's called, but it's really the old National Road. This was the first real paving of the old National Road, and it gives you some idea of just how narrow it was. But you have to realize in the early days of the automobile and the latter days of horse and buggies, there wasn't that much traffic you were meeting. I think it's a wonderful thing that this county has not paved over this brick, for it's a loving memory of another time and another infrastructure. Finally, it's off the precious brick onto a more drivable section of the old road US 40, into a city that has a lot of memories for me. We're in downtown Cambridge, Ohio, on the old National Road, and where this Rite Aid pharmacy stands now, there used to be a big Buick garage. The reason I know that is that when I was in 8th grade, our car broke down going through Cambridge, and we had to take it to the Buick garage for about 6 hours. And down the street, there used to be a coffee shop on the corner. My mom and I spent the entire day in that coffee shop eating toast and drinking Coca-Cola. We continue now down the old National Road to another one of those pieces of infrastructure that set a precedent. And you gotta trust me on this. It's the only place I know where you can drive to the center of the river and turn left or right. It's the famous Y Bridge here in Zanesville, Ohio, and it's quite a sight. And I often wonder how many people unfamiliar with the area couldn't figure out which way to go and then realize they were on a bridge. So the next time you're on a narrow bridge or a winding road, think about this: making a turn in the middle of the river in Zanesville, Ohio. And as we head farther west on the old National Road, become US 40, we get into some very early 4-lane, and then find a great example of friendliness on the road. Almost to the mile, halfway between my uncle's house in Bethesda, Maryland, and my parents' house in Indiana, was Baker's Motel. And when some of the interstate was finished, we decided to stay here. And in the 1960s, they decided to enlarge this motel, with bulldozers coming in very early in the morning. And I remember we'd had a rough day of driving the day before, and when they built that new section in the back, well, we were staying just to the left of the office, and we couldn't sleep a wink when dawn came. And standing right there was a huge sign. It isn't there anymore. But Baker's isn't what it used to be. Neither are many places along the National Road. In the late 1950s, there was talk all over the old National Road and US 40 in Ohio. I-70 was coming. But where would they build the first section? The first section of I-70 through Ohio started right here. And there used to be a ramp that connected 40 with 70. So if you were headed west, it was just an easy melding. All of that's gone. The grass has grown. The cement is dried. You can't see a trace of it now. But you went over onto the brand new I-70 for 22 miles and came out in Kirkersville, Ohio. And it made sense to end that new section of I-70 right here. It came around for a mile as a 4-lane road. There was an overpass here. Old 40 swung around that way. There is a mile of old Interstate 70 down here. Only 2 lanes of it are being used. That was once part of the interstate system, but now it's a relic. Well, at this point, we leave the old National Road. We head south through central Ohio, finally into Indiana, and eventually to Route 66. So right now, let's figure out how to get around that way. And that ghost section of I-70 is now Ohio 158. We used it to cut down to US 22, to move diagonally through some great towns, Wilmington and Lancaster, Ohio, through some towns with 25-mile-an-hour speed limits, and some beautiful rural areas that make Ohio famous. Finally, to Circleville. And one of the things you miss when you take the interstates, that you see when you take America's back roads, are places such as this, the Ted Lewis Museum. This is Circleville, Ohio. And Ted Lewis, the native son here, eventually became one of the biggest entertainers in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, famous for his question, "Is everybody happy?" This is a beautiful part of southwestern Ohio along US 22, about an hour out of Cincinnati, where you see barns that still say chew mail pouch tobacco and IGA groceries. Here in Sabina, Ohio, though, there's something you don't see. Remember the Ted Lewis Museum in Circleville, remembering the favorite son? Well, little Sabina has a favorite daughter, but there's no monument here for that woman. Her name was Sarah Doan. She wanted to be a school teacher, but married George Lefetre and moved to D.C. Within 5 years, she was head of the Women's Christian Temperance Association, helped get women the vote, and pushed for prohibition. Next is Cincinnati. So what do you do when you don't want to take the toll roads and you don't want to take the 4-lane roads, but you have to go through Cincinnati and you want to stay on the old roads? Well, you take side streets and old highways, and sometimes you find something really interesting. This is the Arlington Heights neighborhood of Cincinnati. And believe it or not, we are in the median of an interstate highway. Probably the widest median in the United States. Part of the road went around one side of the neighborhood, part of the interstate came around the other, and we're smack dab in the middle. Now we're making our way down beautiful Cincinnati streets to a little neighborhood called Cheviot, Ohio. Well, we made it across Cincinnati on all the back streets and back roads, and on our way out of town, I wanted to go 2 blocks out of the way to stop right here. Remember we visited my aunt and uncle's house in the suburbs of Washington, D.C.? Well, my Aunt Pauline and Uncle Wendell lived here, and I went to visit them every summer when I was a kid. When I was about, 11 years old, my Uncle Wendell came to me and said, "Did you bring a tie?" He gave me one of his ties because he wanted to take my aunt and me to a brand new, spiffy, upscale, wonderful restaurant the first of its kind here in Cincinnati, a McDonald's. And the McDonald's was right here, although this is not the original building. The original building, they tell me, was leveled, and this much, much bigger, newer one was built. But this is where my aunt and uncle took me to do something exciting, to go to a brand new restaurant. A man named Ben Groen bought the franchise here. He was a pioneer in putting McDonald's in this part of the Midwest. But this was a mostly Catholic neighborhood, and back then people didn't eat meat on Friday. We need a fish sandwich, he thought. So the fillet of fish was born right here. And so it's on across western Cincinnati down to the Ohio River to catch another of America's great back roads, US 50, which we'll be driving both in Indiana and Illinois, and again in Nevada, where it's the loneliest road in the U.S. Well, we made it. Another milestone through Cincinnati. The Ohio River, which we crossed at Wheeling, is just over there, and Indiana is just over there. So we took the old National Road and 40, diagonalized through Ohio to 50. In St. Louis, we'll take 66 as the adventure continues. Now it's on into Indiana on the back roads.
And as we enter Indiana, even though Old Highway 50 is technically a back road, it's still a narrow 4-lane here, because this area is still part of the Cincinnati urban sprawl. And another city along the way is Lawrenceburg, and something you won't see from the interstate, the local high school football team. Football in Indiana? Shouldn't it be basketball? Well, let's go north a few miles on another old road and fix that.
Sometimes on the old roads, though, you can be disappointed. This is Milan, Indiana. This is a big school here, but it's not the building where the team played in the 1950s, the Cinderella story team that went on to beat the biggest school in Indiana, and about which the movie Hoosiers was made. I wanted to take you to the old gym, but it's not here anymore.
And when you go through the old downtowns, you'll find a lot of stoplights, and also sometimes some confusing overhead signs. The right-of-ways moved over the years. For example, going into Brownstown, Indiana, Highway 50 goes in and makes a right turn, but in the old days, it went straight through, down to Medora, and back up. And it is at Medora. I want to show you the old river bridge.
It's a wonderful place. Has a great fragrance to it of wood. I kind of wish we could drive across, but just being here is something special. It is the longest still existing covered bridge in the United States. Let's get back on Highway 50 now, and our next stop will be another kind of lost artifact when it comes to America's highways. Long before McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's, there were places like this, the Bomac Drive-In along Old Highway 50 in Shoals, Indiana. My great uncle was the dentist here, so I came over here a lot as a kid, and it was open back then. The sad thing is, there are a lot of restaurants on the old roads, like the Bomac, that are now only ghosts.
Well, the shades of night are falling, and it's time to look for a motel.